I recently recorded a podcast with Luke Dodson, which should be posted soon on Substack, I'm told. And it was the first time I'd ever spoken to Luke, and it was a very interesting conversation. I enjoyed speaking with him. And he filled me in on the Hugh Edwards story out of Great Britain, which I had no knowledge of. I had not heard anything about it. It's a little surprising because it's a pretty big deal. Hugh Edwards was sort of the equivalent of what Walter Cronkite was to America, in the 60s. I don't know if there's any kind of media figure that's so beloved or so generally thought of well, or looked to as the voice of conscience. There's he or the voice of the news, but a voice you can trust. A good man, a trustworthy man. It's almost always a lie, of course, but the myth that builds up around people like that is very important as far as when you're talking about the collective psyche of a nation. And Hugh Edwards was exposed as well. Guess what? I mean, it's almost predictable right now. I mean, you can almost fill in the blanks without me telling you. What would you guess that a very high level media figure who was beloved and trusted for years and years on end, what would you suppose that he was exposed as being? Well, you're right. The first thing that came into your mind, you're right. He's allegedly a pedophile. And not just. I don't want to make distinctions here between quote good pedophiles and bad pedophiles, but there's always gradations. He wasn't just into teenage boys, as was sort of the way the story got exposed at first, which is that he was paying boys to show him pictures of themselves in various poses, and then talking and sexting them and paying them off. So that was the scandal on, as I understand it, as it emerged at first, or as it slowly emerged. But then it was eventually found out that he had extensive CP in his collection, which he had bought from somebody online in the dark web, and it was the worst kind of CP that there is. I mean, that's what they say. Just aggravated CP with boys as young as 7 years old. And I don't want to, they say it's just there's no good CP, but again, there are gradations, and I can only imagine. I don't want to imagine what bad is, but so this man in his 60s, a distinguished looking older gentleman who comes on at night and tells the nation the news, and he, when all these various events happened recently, like the death of Prince Philip and the death of the Queen, and then the coronation of Charles, he was there as an inside reporter, talking to people, talking to the priest who would put the crown on Charles' head for the first time, and giving the audience the inside story of it, about all of these sorts of events. And there's footage of him talking about 9/11 and everything. He is just this voice, apparently, who had been around, this voice and this face, who'd been around for a while. And the impression I get is that he was he was loved and trusted and sort of this paternal figure to the nation. And now he's exposed as the worst kind of pervert. And he got a suspended sentence. He's basically gotten off pretty much scot-free. No charges. He doesn't have to spend a day in jail. Meanwhile, people who say the wrong thing on social media are getting arrested and getting severe sentences, getting imprisoned for months or years. But this high-profile newsman, who turns out to have abused or to have viewed footage of abused children and thus participated in their abuse. He's nothing. Basically, nothing happened to him. He lost his job. He might still be getting paid by the BBC. Oh yeah, he worked for the BBC. Isn't that interesting? The same BBC who gave us Jimmy Savile. Like, how many of your heroes have to fall before you realize they were never heroes? I'm saying this in a sort of broad way here. I'm not saying that you should never look up to anybody, but I'm not saying you should just think the worst of everybody who's in media or who is a celebrity. You should just assume the worst about them, but just take things with a grain of salt. Okay, that's what I would do. That's the approach I do take with people I like, musicians or actors or directors or other people who are celebrities, but who are celebrities that I like, whose work I have enjoyed or appreciated. I think I've just learned that we might not know the full picture on these people. But England, man, and I'm not saying like I'm here in the United States. I'm not, like our elite is just as bad as their elite. Don't get me wrong, but it just strikes me sometimes the extent to which people like Jimmy Savile and Hugh Edwards, Jimmy Savile was revered for decades. Something was obviously manifestly wrong with that man. If you paid any kind of attention, you could see that he was a creep. But I guess that people just thought, oh well, he's just eccentric, but he's really a lovable guy, and we love him. He's an English treasure. And he had so many extensive connections, and same with this guy. He had the inside dope on with the royal family. He just, again, my impression is he's just a very well-connected person, broadcasting for the BBC, the voice of the media establishment in Great Britain. And he's exposed for being the same kind of person that Jimmy Savile was. Yeah, maybe not quite as aggravated a case, but still along the same lines, certainly on the same spectrum of behavior when it comes to sexual abuse of children. Um, and so it's just one of those things. I don't know. It was shocking to hear about, because again, I didn't know anything about this guy. I would have thought this would be a bigger story across the pond, like Jimmy Savile was, even though I didn't really know who Jimmy Savile was before the story about him broke. But he was huge. I mean, a very, very important figure in British media, in the collective British psyche, and it sounds like to a lesser extent, but still to a large extent, the same could be said about Hugh Edwards. I mean, we're in an age where all that is, where maybe not all that's been hidden is being revealed, but so much of what was hidden, what we didn't know about when I was growing up. We didn't know these kinds of things were happening. Most people didn't. And we just continue to find things out of an unsavory nature concerning those who have prominent positions of rulership over us, and being the number one news presenter, as they say in Britain. That's a position of authority. So that was wild to find out about.